People who were the forgotten sibling. Did it ever come back to bite your parents? Mine paid for 31 years of treating me like furniture at the exact moment they needed me to save their financial lives. And I want to tell you about the 4 hours I spent deciding whether to do it. I am 31. My older sister Marisol is 34. My younger sister Octavia is 28. My parents had organized our entire childhood around the two of them. Marisol got the violin lessons. Octavia got the writing lessons. I got hand-me-downs and a chair at the back of the table. The forgetting was operational. My parents missed 3 of my birthdays in my 20s. My mother forgot my college graduation entirely because Marisol had a recital the same weekend. My father called me by the wrong name at Thanksgiving when I was 26 and laughed when I corrected him. He said, "Sweetie, there are only so many slots in a brain. The slots had been allocated. I was not in them. I did the thing forgotten kids do. I built a life that did not require their slots. I became a tax attorney specializing in high net worth estate planning. I made partner at 30. I bought a house in cash at 29. I married a kind man named Hendrik who never met my parents because they never asked. I have 2 kids my parents have seen 4 times collectively. When I say my father called me 4 months ago, you need to understand what that means. Beckham does not call me. So when my phone lit up on a Tuesday afternoon with his name on it, I just stared at it for 3 full rings. I picked up and he said, "Honey, we need to talk." His voice was shaking. My father does not shake. My father is the kind of man who speaks in statements, not requests. He told me the IRS had opened an audit on the family business. He said he had been the bookkeeper of his own company for 40 years. He said he had been doing things wrong for about 30 of those years. I asked him what he meant by wrong and he got quiet for a second and then said, "The numbers were not right. The income was not all reported. They are saying it is about 1.8 million. I sat back in my chair. He kept talking. He said, "They are going to take everything. The house, the retirement accounts, the lake property." The lake property was the one they bought for Marisol as a wedding present. A house on a lake for the golden child. I got hand-me-downs and a chair at the back of the table, and Marisol got property. That was the math of our family, always. My father's voice cracked and he said, "Honey, you do this for a living. Honey, please help us." And there it was. Please. That word sat in my ear like something foreign. Please was the word my father had never said to me. Not when I graduated law school. Not when I made partner. Not when I had his grandchildren. He saved it for the moment he needed something only I could give him. I let the silence sit for a few seconds. Then I asked the question I had been carrying my whole life without knowing it. I said, "Why are you calling me and not Marisol?" The silence on his end went on so long I thought the call had dropped. Then he said, "Marisol does not know about money." 5 words. Marisol got $8,000 a year in violin lessons and a lake house for her wedding and a childhood full of attention, but Marisol does not know about money. I said, "Octavia." He said, "Octavia is having a hard time right now." Octavia was always having a hard time. Octavia's hard times had their own budget line in this family. I sat there at my desk with my hand on my forehead and I said the thing I had never said to my father's face in 31 years of being alive. I said, "So the daughter you forgot for 31 years is the one you are calling." I said it flat. I did not yell. I did not cry. I just said it the same way you would read a line off a document because that is what it was. It was a fact. He could have argued. He did not. He said, "Please." Again. I told him I needed to think about it. I hung up. I packed up my bag and I drove home. When I walked through the door, Hendrik looked at me and he knew something was wrong. He went to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee and set a mug in front of me at the kitchen table and sat down across from me. He said, "Whenever you are ready." I told him everything. Hendrik listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I do not know yet." That was the beginning of the 4 hours, where I sat in my own kitchen and went through every memory I had of being the daughter they did not see and tried to figure out if the woman I had become was the kind of person who would let them fall. The first memory that came up was Christmas when I was 9. I remember sitting on the living room floor in my pajamas watching Marisol tear the wrapping off a big box, and inside was the purple bike with the white streamers on the handles. The purple bike I had asked for. I had pointed it out in the catalog and put a little star next to it with a marker. And on Christmas morning, Marisol opened it and screamed and my parents clapped and my father said, "We knew you would love it, sweetheart." I opened my gift. It was socks. My mother smiled at me and said, "You needed new socks, honey." I took a sip of the coffee Hendrik had made and I thought, she does not owe them anything. The second memory came about 20 minutes later. My high school graduation. I was 18 and I had worked hard for that day. They were there for the speeches. They clapped when my name was called and then they left. They left because Octavia had tickets to a concert that night. My mother found me in the parking lot still in my cap and gown and said, "You were great up there, honey. We have to run because Octavia's concert starts at 7. She hugged me fast and got in the car. My best friend's mom drove me to dinner that night. The third memory was my rehearsal dinner, the night before I married Hendrik. My mother Madeline was at the table with my mother-in-law Marley, and I was across the room talking to someone about the seating chart. And when I came back to sit down, I heard my mother mid-sentence saying, "Marisol just got promoted. She is doing so well. Let me tell you about her new position." She was talking to Marley about Marisol at my rehearsal dinner, the night before my wedding. The fourth memory was the one that almost made me pick up the phone and say no right then. Riley was born on a Wednesday. I called my mother from the hospital bed. Madeline picked up and I said, "Mom, Riley is here. She is healthy." My mother said, "Oh, congratulations, honey. That is wonderful." And then she said, "Have you talked to your sister? Octavia is going through it right now." And she talked about Octavia's divorce for 40 minutes. 40 minutes. I timed it. Hendrik was holding Riley in the chair next to my bed and he looked at me and I looked at him and neither of us said a word. I sat at that kitchen table and I went through those 4 memories and a dozen more. Every single one pointed the same direction. Let them fall. They earned it. But here's the thing about sitting with something for 4 hours. You get past the anger. You get to the part underneath all of it, which is the part about who you want to be. It was midnight when I figured it out. Not because the anger went away. The anger did not go away. I figured it out because I looked up at the ceiling toward the bedrooms where Louis and Riley were sleeping and I asked myself one question. What do I want them to learn from this? And the answer was clear. I picked up my phone and I called Beckham. He answered on the first ring, which meant he had been sitting by the phone for 4 hours. I said, "I am going to help you." He started to say something and I cut him off. I said, "I am going to do this for one specific reason. The reason is that watching you and mom lose everything would teach my children that family is something you can opt out of when it is inconvenient. I do not want my children to learn that. I am going to fix this for them, not for you. Do you understand the difference?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Good, because I have 2 conditions conditions, and they are not negotiable. I told him the first. I was going to prepare a document. It would be 11 pages long. It would list 37 specific incidents with dates. The document would be read aloud at a family meeting with both Marisol and Octavia present. The document would be witnessed and signed by every person in the room. Then I told him the second. The lake property. The house on the lake that they bought Marisol for her wedding while I got nothing. That property was going to be transferred into a trust for Lewis and Riley. My father said, I need to talk to your mother. I said, you have 1 hour. He called me back in 43 minutes. He said yes to both. No negotiation, no pushback. And that yes told me more than 31 years of silence ever did. It told me he knew. He had always known. I hung up the phone and I sat at the table for another few minutes. Hendrik looked at me and said, you okay? I said, I just took control of my entire family for the first time in my life. The next 8 months were some of the hardest of my career. I started the next morning. What I found was worse than what Beckham had described. It was not just sloppy bookkeeping. It was 30 years of a man who did not understand the difference between business expenses and personal expenses, who paid for Marisol's violin lessons through the company, who wrote off Octavia's writing equipment as business supplies. I spent nights and weekends on it. I filed amended returns going back 6 years. I negotiated. The original liability was massive. 1.8 million in unreported income with penalties could have been over $700,000. I got it down to approximately $320,000. My parents had to liquidate one retirement account to pay it. The house was preserved, and the lake property was transferred into a trust for Lewis and Riley. I did all of this. Me, the daughter they forgot. But here's the thing that kept me up at night during those 8 months. The thing that kept me up was the question of whether the family meeting was actually going to happen. As the pressure decreased, I could feel the commitment to the document starting to wobble. It started with small things. About 2 months in, my mother Madeline called me, and at the end of the call she said, do you really think the meeting is necessary? Your father and I have been talking, and we feel like we could just apologize privately. I said, the meeting is not negotiable, Mom. That was the agreement. She said, I just think it might be easier for everyone if we kept it between us. I said, easier for who? She did not answer that. A month later, Beckham brought it up. He said, about that document. Do all 37 incidents really need to be in there? I said, yes. He said, some of them are small things. The socks at Christmas. That was 22 years ago. I said, then it should be easy to acknowledge. He got quiet. Then he said, I am just worried about how Marisol is going to take it. That was the moment I almost lost it. He was worried about how Marisol was going to take it, not how I had taken it when it happened. I took a breath and I said, Beckham, you agreed to this. I am currently in the middle of saving your house. The meeting happens as planned or I stop working. He said, okay. I kept working. And in the hours between the tax work and the bedtime routines with Lewis and Riley, I worked on the document. I wrote it the way I write legal briefs. Clear, specific, dated. I went through every year of my life. 37 incidents. The document was not a weapon. I want to be clear about that. I did not write it to hurt them. I wrote it because the forgetting only works when nobody says it out loud. March arrived. The meeting was scheduled for a Saturday. Marisol confirmed last 2 days before in a text that just said, I will be there. Saturday morning, I drove to my parents' house with Hendrik beside me. I walked through the front door of the house they almost lost, the house I saved, and everyone was already sitting in the living room. Nobody was talking. I sat down. I opened the folder. I looked at every single person in that room and I said, I am going to read this out loud. Nobody interrupts. When I am done, everyone signs. I looked down at page 1. I started reading. Incident 1. Christmas. I was 9 years old. I asked for a purple bike with white streamers. Marisol received the purple bike with white streamers. I received 3 pairs of socks. My voice was steady because I had practiced this. I read it like I read documents at work. Clear and flat and factual. Incident after incident. The birthday they forgot when I was 10. The school play they skipped. The graduation they left early. I could feel the room getting heavier with every page. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. When I got to the rehearsal dinner, I heard Marisol make a sound. It was small, like air leaving a tire. I kept reading. When I got to the phone call after Riley was born, the 40 minutes about Octavia's divorce while my newborn daughter slept on my chest, I heard Marisol start to cry. Full, real tears. I looked at her for just a second and I could see it on her face. She did not know. She really did not know the full shape of it. She knew she was the favorite, but she did not know the cost. I kept reading. I got through all 11 pages. When I read the last line and closed the folder, the room was so quiet I could hear the clock in the kitchen. Octavia was sitting very still with her hands in her lap and she was looking right at me. And then Octavia said something I did not expect. She said, I need to say something. I nodded. Octavia said, I have been knowing about the forgetting for years. I knew they treated you different. I knew they forgot your things and showed up for mine. And I did not say anything because it worked for me. I benefited from it. I got more because you got less, and I let that happen. She paused, and then she said, I am sorry. Not in a general way. I am sorry specifically for every time I saw it and said nothing. That hit harder than Marisol's tears. Marisol did not know. Octavia knew and chose to stay quiet because the system worked in her favor. I said, thank you, Octavia. Then I put the document on the coffee table with a pen, and I looked at Beckham and Madeline. Madeline's eyes were red. She picked up the pen first. Before she signed, she looked at me and said, I had not been understanding what I was doing to you. I looked at her and I said, understanding is not the point, Mom. The point is that you did it. She held my gaze for a long time. Then she signed. Beckham signed after her. His hand was shaking the same way his voice shook on the phone 4 months ago. Marisol signed. Octavia signed. I saved their house. I saved their finances. And in exchange, I made every person in that family sit in a room for 40 minutes and look at what they built around me and without me for 31 years. When I picked up that folder and closed it, something had changed in the room that could not change back. The power was mine now. It had always been mine. They just did not know it until they needed me. My parents have been different since March, and the different is real. Madeline calls me every week now. She asks about Louis and Riley by name. Beckham has not called me by Marisol's name once. The change is visible and it is consistent, but I am not confused about what this is. This is not the relationship I should have had for 31 years. This is not them making up for lost time. This is the foundation we are building from here. New, fragile, built on paper and honesty instead of pretending none of it happened. The forgetting came back at the worst possible moment for them, and the daughter they forgot was the only one who could save them. I am the architect now. The architecture is mine.